So, did the visit of the U.S. Vice President answer all those outstanding questions about the ratification of the new trade deal? And what about advancing some of Canada's other concerns, namely the relationship with China? Let's bring in three members of Parliament for more on that. Rob Oliphant is the Parliamentary Secretary to the Minister of Foreign Affairs. Randy Hoback is the Deputy Critic for Trade Diversification for the official opposition Conservatives. And Niki Ashton is the Jobs and Employment Critic for the NDP. It's good to see you all. Thanks for being here. Mr. Oliphant, let me start with you. Did your government hear what it wanted and needed to hear from the Vice President today on the ratification timeline in the United States for the new NAFTA?
There are three ratification timelines. Canada has its own ratification timeline. We began it with a Ways and Means motion on Tuesday, which was supported by the Conservatives. The Prime Minister introduced legislation, which will go through the normal process of a legislative review. It will go to committee after second reading, and we will continue on that process. Mexico has its ratification process. The U.S. has its ratification process. They won't be all happening at exactly the same pace because they're different systems.
Right, but the House of Commons in this country is scheduled to rise at the end of June. So will you want this deal ratified in Canada, even if it hasn't been ratified yet by the Americans in Congress?
I think that the minister's been very clear that she wants to take every step possible to keep as close to the American timeline as possible. All through this, we've had tough negotiations with the United States. The minister and the Prime Minister have very much stood up to the White House. That has been a strong defense of Canadians and Canadians' values. We're going to continue that. The ratification process will happen cautiously, carefully, but following a Canadian timeline, and we'll get it done by the time we need to get it done.
Does it matter which country ratifies first? I mean, it sounds like it's going to proceed in Mexico. It's in the Senate there now, and President saying it should happen quickly.
I personally,
I mean, should we ratify in this country even if the Americans haven't?
The deal doesn't come into effect until all three countries have ratified. So we need all three countries to ratify it to make this this huge deal, which is a win-win-win deal for all three countries. We're going to go through the process. They won't happen at exactly the same time. We have two houses that have to approve this deal. The cabinet will be engaged in it all the way through. The minister will be tracking developments closely, and we'll get it done, and we'll ensure that Canadians and Canadian businesses are protected.
All right. Mr. Hoback, what should Canada do here? You and your colleagues in the House, should you go ahead and ratify this deal, even if it's still not ratified in the U.S.? Is there any risk in Canada doing that?
Yeah, no, I think the wise thing to do is to follow carefully what's going on in the U.S. and react accordingly. The messaging we're getting down in the U.S. from the Democrats is there's some changes they want to see in that piece of legislation, even though we've been very clear that there's no more renegotiation of the NAFTA. Reality is, though, that the Democrats control the House, and as they go through their system, there could be some subtle changes made to it that may have implications here in Canada and Mexico. So there's things we can do in the background right now to utilize our time very efficiently if we so choose, but in the same time, to go and say, a blank vote without really knowing what the end product is would be irresponsible on behalf of parliamentarians at this point in time.
Niki Ashton, what's your view on this? Your party says the deal isn't the right deal for Canada, but it's going to be ratified, it would seem, with the Conservatives and Liberals on side. But should that happen before it's clear whether it will get ratified by the U.S. Congress and whether Democrats there might be successful in trying to change it?
Mm-hmm. Well, look, I think there was a number of pieces in this joint visit that were rather disturbing. I mean, on the trade deal, we've been very clear that this is not a good deal for Canada. It's affecting jobs. It's bad for the environment. The dairy sector is negatively impacted. It's a gift to Big Pharma in so many ways when they certainly don't need any gifts. And we believe that some of the things that the Democrats are fighting for are important, and we should let them be able to fight for these things that may benefit us as well. We need a Prime Minister and a government that's going to go to the wall for us when it comes to good jobs. Ratifying the agreement as it stands is certainly not that. And Vice President Pence doesn't care about whether or not Canadians are better off with this deal. I mean, he and his administration have made it very clear that it's all about them.
Okay, Mr. Oliphant, the Prime Minister today also urged Democrats in the U.S., along with Vice President Pence, to ratify the deal, saying it includes the progressive measures on labor and environment that the Democrats in the United States championed. So I guess, does your government plan to go to Washington now and directly lobby Democrats to ratify this deal? I mean, you've sent that message from Canada, but would it be worthwhile to push that in the United States by going to Washington?
There have been conversations and there will be conversations. I just want to correct some things for the record. Business, labor unions across this country have spoken extremely positively about this deal. Let's turn the clock back. When Mr. Trump was elected, he was prepared to rip up the old NAFTA deal. He was prepared to let it go. And NAFTA has created jobs in Canada.
I get that. What I'm asking is how far are you prepared to go to get the Democrats on side in the United States?
Well, that's not our job. We have our own sovereign country. We've negotiated a very good deal for Canada. It includes the most progressive issues ever with respect to the environment, with respect to labor, and with respect to Indigenous rights. I would challenge the other parties to actually look at the deal, to read it carefully, and recognize that we've made those things. We are in conversation. The United States has its process. It's a sovereign country.
And that's where
that's
where I'm focusing for now. Mr. Hoback, what more do you think the government should be doing? We heard the Prime Minister talk about the Democrats today. Should we be lobbying Democrats in Washington right now to ratify this deal?
Well, I have mixed reactions to that question. Yes, there's more they should be doing, but I don't think the Prime Minister should be doing it because every time he's touched this file, he's bumbled it. He's actually created more problems than solutions. So I think, we have.
And yet the Vice President said today that, boy, he drove a tough bargain.
That Prime Minister.
Ronna Ambrose
the Vice President today was actually being when you looked at and watched his face expression, here's a guy who won clearly, and he's actually acting like a winner, and he was actually consoling the Prime Minister in the fact that he lost so much. That's exactly what it looked like, and that's exactly what he's doing. He was just basically being a good sport, one might say. Reality is that when you look back to how this all happened, Canada was never, ever the target of these negotiations. It was always Mexico. There was always issues with labor with Mexico or other issues in the environment with Mexico. It wasn't us. It wasn't until Prime Minister Trudeau and Chrystia Freeland actually started making snide remarks, comments in the media that actually rubbed the president the wrong way, that all of a sudden changed that focus right onto us. And the end result, they do the deal with Mexico and then they hand what's left to us to ratify.
But here we are today. So in your view,
here we are today, but we better learn from our past.
The Vice President saying Justin Trudeau drives a hard bargain. You think he was just being nice?
I think he's just being a good sport.
Right, Niki, Ashton, what do you think?
Well, I mean, the fact that Mike Pence would be nice about anything is, I don't know, I find it hard to believe. Look, I want to say that, for us, it's critical that jobs be at the center. I mean, NAFTA has not been a good deal for Canadians, for Canadian jobs. And, I mean, over the years, it hasn't been. I mean, welcome to Southwest Ontario, to places, the manufacturing sector that's been hollowed out in such a big way as a result. And now we're going for a second round. And look, I mean, we've got Pence telling us about what we've done or haven't done. I'd also like to see the Prime Minister not just stand up for good jobs, but also women's rights. This is a Vice President that today in his press conference talked about being proud of and being a part of a pro-life administration. I mean, this is a statement that's totally unacceptable with respect to our values here in Canada. And I would like to see the Prime Minister did raise it.
The Prime Minister did raise it.
He raised it, but he certainly didn't have a commensurate statement when Vice President Pence was so brazen in frankly disrespecting women's rights in our own country.
Mr. Oliphant, you were just in China as part of a delegation pushing for the release of 2 Canadians being held there. The Vice President said the U.S. is pressuring China on Canada's behalf, and the President will be speaking to the Chinese leader at the upcoming G20 summit. But he also made it clear he wants Canada to ban Huawei from Canada's 5G networks. Do you believe there's a quid pro quo at work here, that the U.S. will go to bat for Canada against China, but Canada must ban Huawei?
I welcomed the statement, the joint statement today that the Vice President and Prime Minister made with respect to 2 Canadians who are being arbitrarily held in detention in China. I don't think that's part of any other thing. That's part of the United States joining a collective of dozens of other countries which have supported Canada as a country of the rule of law. And they are standing together. These are like-minded countries, as well as some unusual countries who've joined us in that crusade. I was in China a week ago. It was a parliamentary delegation. I went as a member of parliament as well as the parliamentary secretary. We're offering to constantly open those doors. Unfortunately, the Conservatives and the NDP chose not to send someone to that delegation. They didn't didn't take the opportunity to stand up for Canadians who were in detention, that they were invited to join the delegation, and they didn't. We will take every opportunity. There's no quid pro quos going on here.
Well, I mean,
Canada will evaluate Huawei and doing a due process about security.
Just before I move to
number one.
Just before I move to Mr. Hoback, I mean, the president in the United States has mused about, making the extradition of the Huawei executive currently being detained in Vancouver. Mused about that as a possible bargaining chip. Do you know if there was any commitment today from the U.S. Vice President that won't be the case, that Canada won't be paying this price for detaining this Huawei executive, only to have that all change in a trade negotiation between the U.S. and China?
Well, I think Canadians are paying for the price of a lot of bundling that's been done by this Prime Minister. And the reality is that, I look at canola farmers, for example, right now. I look at pork producers. They're paying the direct cost of this Prime Minister's inaction in China. Reality is, wherever we go around the world, we've lost so many allies who would normally have our backs in situations like this. But because of how the Prime Minister's handled himself, I'll go to Australia, I'll go to Japan, I'll go to a lot of the countries.
I met with the ambassador from
They're not sticking up for us. They're not doing anything for us.
Ambassador from
Saudi
Japan.
Arabia,
I met with
all those other places that
they are standing with us strongly. Absolutely strongly.
Mr. Hoback,
shoulder to the
hello.
wheel
Let's ask him.
Hello.
Let's ask him.
All right.
Asking and doing are two different things.
Let me ask you, Niki, Ashton, I'm going to get to you in a second, but I want to come back to Mr. Oliphant and have you answer that question. Was there any conversation today that you're aware of with the Vice President that said, look, we are paying a price here in the relationship with China to hold this executive detained in Vancouver, Huawei executive. Can you promise that extradition process won't be dropped as part of a trade deal between the U.S. and China?
We have an extradition treaty with the United States. We're a country of the rule of law. We have a judicial process that takes
I know
place.
that. That's not what I asked, though. I asked, do you know if there was any conversation?
We do not have conversations that do not include the rule of law and standing up for Canadians. We will stand by the rule of law. We will stand for human rights. We will engage in absolutely everything by following the appropriate process. Our Prime Minister has been very clear about this.
Okay, Niki, Ashton, should Canada ban Huawei?
I don't think so. I mean, I think we're in a very precarious situation because we are doing the United States bidding. I mean, when it comes to China, Canada has a proud history of setting its own path in terms of diplomacy, in terms of trade, and unfortunately, under this Prime Minister, we've been frankly doing the U.S.'s bidding, and to our grave costs. And I think it's very important.
Mr. Oliphant,
with all due respect,
Niki Ashton finish
if we're also going to talk about human rights, here we had Vice President of the United States, a country that is currently detaining people in cages, people that they view as being illegal. So I think it's pretty rich taking notes from them on human rights abuses when they, in fact, are engaging in human rights abuses on their own territory, and where they need to be held account as well.
We'll have to leave it at that. Thank you all for your time tonight. We'll talk again.
Thank you.
Thank you, Peter.